plans I had scheduled for today got all, it's like, what is everybody working on some other day?
Oh, really? Everything got screwed up?
Unbelievable, unbelievable, but that's all right. We'll figure it out.
Well, hopefully this will go well.
Yeah, my daughter did get her, my daughter's an art teacher at a private school
I see.
here in New Haven. And she got some good news today. Has worked there. In February, it will be a year. So what, 9 months?
Right.
And she just got her second promotion.
Wow, that's
Very,
great.
very proud of her. Very proud of her.
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
So let me tell you what I know about you. Okay. And then we can go from there. How does that sound?
Sure.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Am I too loud?
No, I can hear you fine.
Okay. You live on Alden Avenue. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You have a background in money and finance and all things capitalist. What else? Let's see. You ran against Adam Marchand this past Alder election season.
Correct.
And Alan Appel called you a gadfly, which annoyed me. Not because you are or are not, but because I think it's irresponsible of any journalist to result in name calling, and I consider it a name calling. You are passionate about what you believe in. You are very conscious of the city's budget, and you are very concerned about that. Rightfully so. Rightfully so. I'm going to assume you're a homeowner.
Yes.
And a taxpayer. And you have every right to be concerned. And a responsible resident of New Haven should be concerned. They should know where their dollar is going. Yeah?
Right.
So I think you and we may not philosophically have a lot of things in common, but I think that we have personalities that are very similar in that regardless of what side of the fence we're on, we are very ethical people and we are very determined people and we are very passionate about the things that we believe in. Right or wrong. And you take us as you find us, and we are not going to mold ourselves to popular opinion. Pretty much.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything you've said so far.
Which makes us generally, well, at least let me speak for myself, very unpopular people, in the sense that I'm not inclined to want to play the game and tend to be on the outside looking in. So,
I think that's true. I think that does tend to make people like myself come across as being unpopular. And I think what politicians are very good at is not committing to a certain point of view and not saying too much for fear that they'll upset, part of the electorate, one side or the other. And so, it's very hard to nail them down on a specific position. And even when I was running for Alder, a lot of people who were seasoned in politics said, I'm talking too much, I'm saying too much. You can't go on record with so many different positions because you're sure to alienate some people one way or another. But I didn't consider myself a politician, don't want to be a politician if that's what it takes. I'd rather speak my mind and go to sleep at night with a clear conscience. And I also think a lot of what I say or my positions are more mainstream than than people think. So if you look at a political spectrum, I'm probably, if you got the far left and the far right, I'm probably in the middle 60%.
Don't you think that's the majority of people? I do. I think
I
that,
think it is.
you
I
know,
think it is, but I think within that majority, you also have certain issues that if you take one side or another on, it will alienate some of those people. So, most people are mainstream, but, you get to, I'm not sure what the issue in New Haven would be, if it would be sanctuary city or maybe, affordable housing. If you come out one way or another on that issue and people feel strongly about it, all of a sudden, you're crossed off the list. And I think that's why a lot of our elected officials, more of the controversial type of topics, choose either to not take a position or just go with whatever seems to be popular at the moment.
yeah, I would agree with you completely. I, I'm older than you are, and the first person that I voted for president was George McGovern in 1972, and it's not been a good ride since then. You know what I mean? But, I can only think of less than a handful of candidates in all of my history of voting. I'm not talking just federal election, but local and everything. I can only think of a handful of candidates that I was absolutely sure were telling me the truth.
Right.
Well, actually half a handful. But let me ask you this.
Let me see if I could get a little more light in here, because I think I'm dark.
Okay.
Let me see if I
Look
can-
kind of rosy to me.
Well, that's what a hot shower will do to a fair-skinned person like myself. Let me see.
Oh yeah, that's cute.
There we go.
Okay.
We'll see if
Well,
we
now you
can-
get a little tan to you. You're
Now
fine.
I've got, yes.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay,
My daughter can play with this a little bit too, from what I understand.
okay.
But tell me right now, out of all of the issues that New Haven is facing, think about crime, drugs, housing, COVID, money, budget, money. What else? Money. What's the number one issue in your opinion right now?
Yeah, the most important issue is the city finances, because until you get that straight, nothing else matters. You can talk about crime, you can talk about affordable housing, you could talk about the schools, you could talk about quality of life, you could talk about the parks, you can talk about all of this, but until you fix the fiscal house, it doesn't matter, because there's no money to do anything, and you can't do too much without money.
What's the fiscal house?
The
Explain.
city budget, the deficit, the amount the city spends, the amount it takes in. And so what I liken it to is, you have a lot of different factions in the city, east side, west side, churches, all these different special interests. And, I liken it to, pigeons fighting for crumbs on a stormy afternoon, right? Because all that's left in the budget at the end of the day, when you try to do what the city's doing right now, are a few crumbs, right? And this year, for example, the city is not going to even provide the $10,000 to each community management team to allow the community to find ways to spend money. So even that's been taken away. So there's really no money to do anything. And so you can have the best ideas, the best motivation, but without money, it's hard to do anything. So until the city addresses that in a way that really is practical, everything else is just noise.
I
And I
got it.
think, my view, it's clear to me that the city is bankrupt.
Is
okay.
what? I'm sorry, Del.
It's bankrupt.
Yeah. Okay.
So when you look at it, when you don't have money for parks, when you don't have money for schools, when you don't have money for enough police, the basics that other municipalities take for granted, when you don't have money to do that, then you're bankrupt. And the deficit that the city has is actually larger than they record. And the reason why I say that is because the amount that the city contributes to the pensions each year is underestimated because, and this is a little technical, but the discount rate and the rate of return that the city assumes the pension funds will earn is overstated. And it's probably overstated by 1 percentage point, and each 1 percentage point overstatement in the amount that those funds will earn means that the city can contribute $10 million less per year. So
Okay.
if the city were really contributing what it ought to,
Mhm.
it would be putting in, it would be contributing an additional $10 million each year
To their pensions.
to the pensions. And
Okay.
it comes out of the operating budget.
Okay. Now, how much, what's the total, the bottom line of the city's budget? What's the entire total?
You know, I don't have the exact amount, but I
Yeah,
believe the
give me a
budget
rough figure.
this year is around $590 million.
All right. Where is that?
That's the operating budget. There's also the capital budget for infrastructure.
Don't confuse me right now, Dennis, okay?
Okay, so let's keep it simple. About $590 million.
Okay. Where's that money going?
Well, you know, more than half of it goes to education, I believe. Education, police, fire, those are the big line items.
Okay.
So there's not much, when you look outside of that, the city's pretty much cut to the bone in other areas. There's
Okay.
not much, you can only cut so much in parks.
Okay. So how does the city, and that's what its budget is, 590 million, give or take. Yeah? How much is it taking in?
Well, you need to balance the budget, at least on paper. So it'll take in 590 million, but you know, I think
That's
less
not
than
real.
half of that comes from city taxpayers. The rest comes from the state and other
Okay.
funding mechanisms.
But it doesn't meet that 590 million.
It doesn't need it. Well, this past year, you know, basically came out with, you know, we took in 590 million roughly and spent 590 million.
But you're saying that's on paper.
That's on paper, but the $590 million gives you what you get today, right? Which is a city without clean parks, without clean streets, with like a dysfunctional, you know, operating system.
So,
Right? Without enough police, probably maybe too many firemen.
right. So if it should have 590 million and it takes in 590 million, do you see where I'm going here? So
Yeah.
why don't we have? Should our budget be higher? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What
So
makes
what?
the city
So I
supposed
guess
to do what it
happy-
wants to do?
if you're happy with the way the city is today, then 590 million is enough. But if you're one of those people who waited 4 years to get a trunk removed from the front of your property, or you're someone who's waited a couple of hours for, you know, to file a police report, or you don't have enough police, like people in many neighborhoods are saying, then, or if you're, you know, you have kids in the school system, and I don't know anybody who's happy with the school system, then it's not.
So what should we be doing?
Well, what I think the city should do, and I've commented about this a couple of times on the New Haven Independent. I think the city should do what Hartford did a number of years ago. Hartford turned around and said, you know, their financial situation is unsustainable. And so they filed paperwork to file for municipal bankruptcy. And they told the state they were going to do that unless they got some sort of a rescue. And the state turned around and provided, I think it was $500 million.
Aha.
And, and meanwhile, New Haven and Bridgeport sat back and remained silent instead of, doing the same thing. And now there's no money from the state. There's no money available from the state. Hartford got it all.
Huh. So if we can't do what Hartford did, what can we do?
Well, I think you can do what Hartford did. You just need to be prepared to go through with the bankruptcy, which would be painful. But short of that, you're saying that you're happy with what the city has. Now, I know the outcries are for Yale to do more and pay more, but Yale does contribute a lot. I think they contribute more than any other university in the country to their hometown. And when you look at the way the city's managed its fiscal measures, it hasn't done a very good job of it. And so, there's a lot of things that stick out. I mean, if you just look at, for example, what was done this year, the city signed off on a $400,000 annuity for the outgoing president of the New Haven Fire Department. So Frank Ritchie is going to walk away with a $400,000 annuity. I think he worked for the city for 22 years. He's retiring on a 30-year pension because of the way the rules work. And so somebody like that one individual will in retirement earn probably $3 to $4 million. When you think about the fact that we've got 300 firemen, if we spend $3 to $4 million on retirement for each person in the fire department who retires, it's unsustainable. And so I think most people realize this, that it's unsustainable, but they're sort of whistling by the cemetery. They're trying to keep the party going. Nobody wants to take the punch bowl away because it's not politically practical to try to take the punch bowl.
So is there any remedy for this?
I think bankruptcy is inevitable. Bankruptcy is inevitable unless the city can come to some sort of grand bargain with all the major players, and the major players are the state, Yale University, management, labor, the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. I know what you're saying, and you're probably, I'm not going to disagree with you about Yale and it contributing to the city. I don't disagree with that. However, I think there is a perception, and I'm one of the people who perceives it this way. There's a perception that Yale is, not only does it not contribute its fair share, it's like a thorn in the side of a lot of people in New Haven. Good, bad, or different, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, it is. We see students, walking around. We have to paint stuff on the sidewalk to keep them from walking across the street and getting run over. It's like, it's just a thorn in the side. Maybe it's because it's such a small city that makes their presence seem larger. And I think when you see headlines about Yale's surplus versus our deficit, that just puts the sword in just a little bit further, right? Let me ask you this, however.
I think Yale can do. I think Yale can do more, and Yale will do more, but under the right terms. And I don't think, when you're asking people for money, I don't think publicly shaming them, is the way to do it. And I think the city needs to, if the city was more responsible with the money it does have, then you can make a stronger argument.
I think you're absolutely right, as far as doing better with what it's got.
Right. And so, the president, the Board of Alders President Taisha Walker-Myers, last year during the pandemic, put together a caravan of people to drive through the city and protest at the Yale president's, in front of the Yale president's house. And
Right.
she threatened to shut down the city. And I'm like, you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're threatening to shut down the city. We already see what the city looks like when Yale isn't here. I mean, I think that sort of, tone isn't helpful. And the real reason why I think someone like that is doing it is because of something that doesn't affect the city directly, and that's the Unite Here union that she belongs to. So she's dragging that into the mix,
Well,
and I
yeah,
think
I
that
mean,
makes things a lot more complicated.
I think any sort of, I call it pontificating, any sort of, let's play to the press. Let's see how big a mouth we can get in the shortest period of time. I think any of that is grandstanding with no substance, and it's infuriating to me. I won't go to a rally. I won't do any of this kind of stuff because it's pointless, and it's just to get your name in the paper, and it's just to make a point. And you're being fueled by an organization such as Unite Here, and any other number of them that is suspect at the very best, and who has a very questionable agenda and a very questionable history.
Mm-hmm.
And this is somebody who's been a strong union supporter most of my working life, not no more. But here's something, let me
And listen, I think unions play an important role. They do.
No question about it.
But I also think that Unite Here and the Board of Alders have overstepped their
It's too
boundaries.
intertwined, and I've considered a conflict of interest. Now, let me run something else by you. Something that somebody and I were just kind of like running through this a little while ago. And when we talk about fixative measures and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've thought often about is that there's too many alders. And we were talking about this. There's, trying to get 30 people to agree on anything is just, but, but that there's too many alders, it's unnecessary, and it needs to stop being a personality contest and a popularity contest. Okay? That if you want to have somebody head a finance committee, you ought to have people in who know something about finance. And that if you want to talk about development committees, then have people who are cognizant of development and housing and police and so on and so on and so forth. So how could that ever be, and maybe you don't agree, but how could that ever be feasible? Because to me, my education's in political science and public administration. And by administration, those people who are able to administer. Yeah. And so how could we ever, so that people start to recognize that it's not who goes to the right churches, but who has the most knowledge. Mm-hmm. And would that not make for a better, more responsible, more responsive city? The floor is yours, Dennis.
No, listen, I agree. Whether 30, the number 30 is the right number of alders or not, I don't know. When I was growing up, the alder was a lot different. The alder was the person you went to when the street wasn't being cleaned, or you had a broken, lamp, or you wanted to put up a stop sign in the neighborhood. It was more neighborhood focused. And now the alders have seemed to sort of outsource that to see Click Fix.
Yeah.
And they've got their hands in a lot more of the city's operations and finances. And I believe there used to be a Board of Finance. And now, the alders have more control over the finances. The problem is that the alders most of them don't have any background in finance.
That's exactly my point. Thank you for your
And
support.
even, I attended I think I was one of the only people to speak at the most recent finance committee meeting. And there was no public comment other than mine. I think there's 10 people on the Board of Finance or the Finance Committee from the Board of Alders. And Michael Gormany, the budget director, came forward and said that his department was forecasting a $14 million deficit. And so you had a handful of questions. Alder Anafesta always asked good questions. There were a few other questions sprinkled in, but most people had no questions. And I sat there and I said to myself, how could you have no questions?
On 14 million, you have no question?
That's right.
You have no question.
Right.
I have
Probably 6
no-
out of the 10 had no questions.
I have no history in finance. I can do 2 + 2. That's about it. But I'll tell you what, just like if you hand me an envelope full of 7,000, you talk 14 million, I got a question. You know?
Right. And so what you have is, people are assigned to the finance committee. And so, what I've heard is that Abby Roth out of East Rock, who attends most of the FRAC meetings, is dying to get on the finance committee meeting, but the president won't put her on, right?
Why?
And so, right, why? When you have 6 out of 10 people not asking questions when you have a $14 million budget deficit, why would you not put somebody on, who follows the financial issues?
Is it
And
because
so I
she's
think,
not in the inner sanctum or something? Abby, rather?
excuse me?
Is it because she's not part of the inner sanctum?
I don't know why, she's not part of Unite Here. I think, operates a little bit more independently and based on facts and data
Right.
rather than towing the party line.
Right.
So that has something to do with it.
Maybe maybe Abby is part of the contingent of people who want to do what's right for New Haven, not what's.
Well, that's right.
Abby.
That's right. And, so when you look at the finances in the city, I'd say, here's what's worrisome to me. The controller that worked under the Harp administration, Daryl Jones, resigned on.
I'm sorry.
Daryl Jones.
Okay.
He lives in Upper Westville. I think he's from New Haven originally. I think he's a New Haven success story. He's a nice guy. I don't always agree with him on finance matters. In fact, a lot of times I don't. But I think he was a hardworking guy. And, he resigned March 1st, and his position has been vacant now for 9 months. And so when you've got such dire financial forecasts, historical deficits, not enough money for the basics, how can the city go so long without filling that position? I know from having, worked in similar type of situations in relatively small finance departments, if you lose 1 or 2 key people for a long period of time, it's very easy for things to get messed up.
So what does he say? What does the city say?
I asked, one of the big disappointments to me has been the lack of focus that the Financial Review and Audit Committee gets. And so unfortunately, it's become relatively irrelevant. There was a time when, when the New Haven Register, New Haven Independent, and the Yale Daily News would attend each meeting. Department heads would come and speak and testify. But that hasn't happened probably for a year. And, a lot of the information that gets discussed in those meetings is very important, but it just doesn't get covered. And so the Financial Review and Audit Committee is something that was put in place after the Board of Finance was eliminated. And it's supposed to be an independent body that sort of serves as a check and balances and the second set of eyes. But, to me, it just hasn't been able to do that because most often the type of information that you can ask questions, but getting them answered is a different story.
Yeah.
And both administrations, the Harp administration and now the Elliper administration, have not been forthcoming with financial information.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
And what you'll see is that I'm an equal opportunity complainer and critic. So, you know, I sort of jumped into the fray during the Harp administration when
uh-huh.
I sort of found myself shaking my head so often about what the Harp administration was doing.
Yeah.
People took it as though I was anti-Harp and pro somebody else. Um, but I think, people now, if you look at my comments on the New Haven Independent, during the FRAC committees, during the financial Board of Finance meetings, they realize that, I'm sort of agnostic when it comes to
I
specific.
think that in some respects, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in some respects you're a lot like I am. I'm not on anybody's team. I'm for New Haven. Okay. I love New Haven, have always loved New Haven, have always been impressed by New Haven. And what's good for New Haven is what's important to me, not what's good for this one, that one, this one, or that one. Let's backtrack a little bit here. How long have you been in New Haven?
I was born and raised in New Haven.
Get out.
I've
I didn't know that.
been in New Haven for 57 and a half years.
Really?
Yeah. And
Wow.
I was in the same house for 57 years, or
Wow.
56 years in the same house.
In Westville.
No, I moved to Westville about a year and a half ago, um, or 2 years ago. I forget now. But I grew up in the Edgewood section of New Haven
Okay.
on Elm Street, which is between El Grasso and Brownell. And the Edgewood neighborhood growing up was not unlike the Westville neighborhood now. You had a corner store, the houses were well kept. Most of the people who owned homes had owned homes for a very long period of time.
Hmm.
People were very active in the community. It was always a mixed neighborhood. Um, you had all different races,
Hmm.
and you also had um, a large Jewish population around Rabbi Greer's school. And so it was always a very diverse neighborhood. But then what happened, I would say, late 70s, is a lot of absentee landlords came in and purchased the properties.
Hmm.
And on that side of the park, there's more multifamilies than there are on this side of the house, as on this side of the park.
Park. Yeah.
And what comes with absentee landlords is really for them, there's no most, some people who lived there for a long time in the neighborhood held onto their property and rented it out responsibly.
Hmm.
But when the absentee landlords come in, for them, it's a piece of paper. There's no
There's
emotional.
no human being there at all, basically.
That's right. There's no commitment to the community. And so what happens is they rent to anybody. They don't care if there's garbage or litter out in front. They're
Right.
not inclined to put up, to get a tree from URI, because the tree in front of the property means leaves, which means maintenance.
Hmm.
What they'll do is they'll knock down the garage, they'll pave over the backyard so there's no grass to cut. Um, and so you do that in a couple of streets, and before long, the people who own property and want to keep it up get tired and throw in the towel. And so as an example of that, on the street where I grew up, where my family still owns a house, there is a property where I have sent 15 emails to LCI complaining about, over the last 2 years, complaining about the way that absentee landlord maintains the property and the garbage that's out in front.
Hmm.
15 emails, not one single fine. The person has not been fined once. And
You
so
know,
if you're not fined, what's the incentive to clean up your act, so to speak?
yeah. We were finding
So the
that.
city's looking for money, but there's money available, right? Start
Right.
finding the people who aren't taking care of their property and
I think
aren't part of the neighborhood.
I think there's a lot of money in New Haven that's not being, for example, and people might think these little things are minor, but I think if you look at all of this stuff, it starts to add up to a good, nice little chunk of change. And it sets the tone as a responsible city. For example, there's, for every car that drives on the streets in New Haven, I will bet you line up 10 of them, and I'll bet you 8 of them are not registered and are not taxed. You know?
You're right.
And I think that, you know, the police chief said that he was going to start, he was going to do one of these things where he stopped cars, you know, and get registered, and people who were licensed, make sure they were insured. Well, it never happened. And that was how they were going to start, you know, getting guns and finding them and all this kind. Never happened. I think fining landlords, I think that's an excellent idea. I wish somebody would just have the guts to do it. Just do it. Stop talking about how you're going to do it, or you're going to do it, or maybe we should do it. Just do it. You know, just do it. And we were starting to have the same problem in this very small complex. The landlord was starting to rent to anything with a pulse. And before you know it, the people behind who live in single family houses are complaining because one of the tenants is throwing their garbage out the second floor window. All right, that's it. That's where I'm drawing the line. And if you have,
That's a good place to draw the line.
you know, if you want to think you're going to try to evict me and think you're going to this and that, I don't scare easy. You know, I really don't scare easy. And the last few months, things have started to change. Not necessarily because of my effort, but because I have a very loud mouth. You know what I mean? And I don't, I got nothing to lose. I don't own property. You can't be throwing bricks through my window. It's not going to hurt, not going to hurt me. And I don't have a car, so you can't hurt my car. So, you know, and so I think there are a lot of people like you, a lot of people like me, who want somebody to have the guts to fight for this city without an agenda, without beholding to the unions and
No,
beholding.
you're right. And I think, you know, this,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Del. Go.
Yeah. I think, you know, the police chief does, the police chief, I think in a lot of ways gets the direction from the politicians. I think it's always been that way. And so I'll give you an example. I've tried getting, you know, the city to help clean up Edgewood Park because on the weekends, mostly in the spring and summer, you know, people arrive, and even though there's plenty of garbage cans, they just throw their garbage on the street. And then every night at the end of the day, on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it's a mess.
Of course.
And I've asked the city to come in, put somebody there from LCI, give notice to people that if they litter, they'll be fined. You know, because the city doesn't have the money to send a parks person around to clean every day.
Right.
And so they don't have the money for that. And so we can't clean up every day. But the city also didn't want to go and levy fines on people who were littering. And then I asked that the city and the police make a note that when it started to get dark out, to push the people away from the park, right? You've got 12 hours to be in the park. If you're showing up at the park at night.
Sunset, you know?
But they wouldn't do that either. So there's this sense that, you know, people want things to change, but they don't want anything to change.
Isn't that incredible? And that's where you get, I think, the apathy and the irritation and the anger and the, you know, and so when things reach a boiling point, it's because it's reached a boiling point.
If people vote with their feet, that's what happened in the Edgewood neighborhood where I used to live. People will fight for a little while. Most people will give up after a while and they'll walk away. And my worry is that that's what'll happen here in Westville, because I saw it happen in Edgewood.
Right.
And I've seen absentee landlords come in, and I've seen them, the way they keep up their property. You know, not all of them, but some of them.
I would say better than 2/3 of them.
Disregard the park, you know, and really no, the city not wanting to take responsibility, and the alders that are in place whose ward the park resides in, I've never seen any interest in keeping the park clean.
What about Friends
or
of Edgewood Park? That organization's not around anymore?
Well, Friends of Edgewood Park does a lot. They do a great job, but they're not funded by the city.
Right. It's all,
We can't even, there isn't even money to get garbage cans for the perimeter of Edgewood Park.
you can't even get them. Yeah, when I lived in the Hill, you couldn't get garbage pails for the corners.
The nice green ones, can't get them. And that's why I'm saying is, if you're at the point where you can't get a garbage can, the city's bankrupt. Something's wrong, right? If you don't have money for a garbage can and instead you want to send a parks person by once a week, because there's no place to put the garbage. And it's not even not that people will stop littering, but people who walk by, if you see a bottle and you can pick it up and put it in a garbage can, you'll do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm meeting with the parks director on Monday to go around and tell him where we'd like to see the garbage cans. And I know they're going to try to push those, cheap white barrels on me.
Right. Yeah.
But I think, there's no reason why we shouldn't have the nice shiny green ones that cost about $250 each.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to cut costs.
Again, there's no leadership from the city to try to address the problem.
And by leadership,
and here's why.
I don't think leadership is just a title. You know what I'm saying? Leadership is an action. It's a verb. It's not a noun. You know what I mean? It's like to lead. I lead, you lead, you know what I mean? It's a verb. It requires action, and in that respect, I have to agree with you. I have to agree with you. So what are we going to do, Dennis?
So think about this for a minute.
Okay.
At some point, Yale New Haven Hospital is going to build $1 billion neuroscience building near the St. Raphael's campus, okay? It's going to create a lot of jobs, a lot of high-paying jobs. And the people who are going to fill those high-paying jobs will have the option to live anywhere they want in the area, okay? They'll be able to live in Orange, Milford, Woodbridge, Bethany, Brantford, Guilford, Madison, or they could live in New Haven. And Westville would be a nice place for them to live. Edgewood would be a nice place for them to live. But if you're driving in and out of the city and you see Edgewood Park with litter all over the place, people hanging out, drinking and smoking, that's gonna be your first impression of the city. Is that where somebody with a family wants to set up shop?
Right.
And instead of living here, they're gonna be contributing to traffic on the way out of here.
And they're not gonna spend their money here. They're not going to pay their taxes here. Now, let's go out on a limb here. Why can't they, why they got to be in Westville? Why are we only saying Westville?
No, they don't have to be only in Westville.
Let's be a little forward thinking, okay? Why can't we get it so that New Hallville can become a Westville?
Well,
why can't Fairhaven become a Westville?
Well, you're right. I think people would rather see Westville become, more like Edgewood, okay, than the opposite, okay? Yeah. Which I think, but I think, you touched on New Hallville. There's a lot of talk about what's happening in New Hallville because of the growth of Science Park and the new housing that's going up, the affordability, and fears of gentrification. And I think the city's got it all wrong. The city is about to spend, along with some not-for-profits, want to spend something like 10 to $12 million building a laundry co-op. And that laundry co-op would rely primarily on the hotel industry and the hospital industry for work. And the laundry co-op would be owned by, as a co-op is, owned by the employees. And I think $12 million is a lot of money to spend on maybe 50 to 100 jobs that are the jobs of yesterday.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Unskilled, with the dependency again on the people that the politicians in the city love to despise, Yale and the hospital. And so I would say, with that money, why wouldn't you, do something to promote home ownership in New Hall?
Oh, God. Right?
So when was the last time you saw an article in the New Haven Register and the New Haven Independent about home ownership?
Well, they are.
Or the city
right?
promoting home ownership? It never happens.
Yeah, but they are now. There's that block of new buildings that's going up on, where is it, Thompson or something? 250, 251. There's a whole,
Yeah, 3 or 4. But I mean, the city is quick to attack Yale, but Yale has a program where if you work at Yale,
right,
they,
right.
Yeah, and I forget how many it is, but I think it's close to 1,000 grants that they've given out.
See, I look at it all, and I mean it in all sincerity, and I bet you we could go on with this all night, and there's some other things about you personally that I wanted to make sure that we touch on, but what's it? Oh, nonprofits in New Haven. There is so much redundancy in these nonprofits, and I just wish, Lily Tomlin used to have this joke in the late 70s when people started getting discharged inappropriately from state hospitals and whatnot.
Mhm.
She used to say that about New York. She wished people who talk to themselves would at least do it in 2 so it would look like they were having a conversation. And that's the way, and that's, I wish that the nonprofits would be too. Just walk down the street together so we can pretend like you're doing something good instead of both of you doing the exact same thing. And none of you, you know what I mean? It's
I
just
think you're right. New Haven is home to a lot of not-for-profits, a lot of tax-free property, and the city continues to give away. The city continues to give away property to not-for-profits.
Every time I hear tax break, the Alders have given a tax break.
In Westville, there's a nonprofit that moved into into the old Jackson Marvin hardware store, right? And so now that property will come off the tax rolls.
See?
When the Harp administration was looking to build out the Route 34 connector, right? That's property that the state gave to the city. The city is forever complaining that there's too much tax-free property. The first thing that the mayor did was hand over acres of property to Continuum of Care, which is a not-for-profit.
Mm-hmm.
That property, which wasn't on the tax rolls, is not going to be on the tax rolls because we gave it to a not-for-profit.
Yeah. Well, and I look at, those apartments on Monterey Place?
Yes.
Okay.
Those the old Haven housing project.
They were given tax-free tax breaks so that they would keep up their property. In other words, mow the lawn, take out the trash, so on and so forth. Well, those tax breaks expired, right? So the people who own it, I think this was like last year or the year before last, the people who own it came before the city and wanted to get tax breaks again so that they could continue to pick up their garbage and this and that and the other. And whomever the alder is said that was that she was very much in favor of that because they were doing such a great job and she wanted to encourage them to keep doing a great job. My thought was, why should you be giving them a break on something they should have been doing anyway? Okay,
No,
first
you're
of
right.
all,
I read that article and I said the same thing to myself. Just,
and the other thing is, if you go near Monterey Place and really look at it, because see, I don't drive, so I have slower transportation.
Mhm.
And if you really look at it, Monterey Place is looking a hell of a lot like Church Street South lately.
Falling
So,
apart.
you know,
Mm,
now let's change this subject completely. You
okay.
ready?
Yes.
Tell me who your hero is, Dennis. And it's got to
My
be
hero,
somebody, oh, hold on. It's got to be somebody of some notoriety, not like mom,
oh,
dad, brother.
okay. Well, my hero growing up was my father. But if it wasn't my father, it was Tom Seaver, who pitched for the New York Mets. I always wanted to pitch for the New York Mets. I
Really?
always wanted to pitch and be a pitcher for the New York, and I still do.
Do
And
you?
and you know, I'm not sure if I'm the only person who has this dream at this point in my life, but there are times, you know, every now and then, you know, every year, every couple of years, where I wake up having had a dream where I somehow managed to finagle my way into playing for the New York Mets.
Can I tell you a
So
story?
it's been a literal and figurative dream of mine for you know, for as long as I can remember.
When I was a kid, I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up in the northwest side of Chicago, Wrigley Field, and the Cubbies and everything, Soldier Field, all that stuff. We had a family friend who was a referee for the Bears. Okay, and this was old time ago. Now you beginning 60s, and we used to be able to. I remember this distinctly, driving up in a car, our car, and sitting on the hood of the car and watching the Bears games. Now,
Really?
yeah, and
Wow.
I remember it distinctly. Remember it distinctly. And it's funny because I wouldn't, I have no use for football or baseball or any of that crap. But I remember that all these years later.
Yeah. Well, I
Tell me,
grew up, you know, when I was growing up in New Haven in the early 70s, the Yale Bowl would be sold out. I remember going with my father and my uncle and his daughter and my brother, and everybody would have, you know, fedoras, and the bowl would be packed.
yeah.
And, you know, it was a wonderful atmosphere. And then this past year, you had the protest game at Yale Bowl, and where the game ended up, you know, there was the delay at halftime over climate change, the protests,
Right.
and the game ended up getting played under the light from the scoreboard.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, Yale ultimately won. I was there with my daughter, and it was a wonderful experience.
So tell me a little bit about, are you married, Dennis?
I'm divorced.
Children?
I have a 15-year-old daughter
Goes to
who
school?
does very well in school, and spends a good amount of time here in New Haven with me. In this, I think New Haven sort of, during the week, she spends time in a pretty affluent, non-diverse community, I would say, and it's a different, and it's a totally different world than what you have in New Haven.
So now, and then
And
she gets to be in reality then from time
this
to
is
time.
reality, right? And this
Yeah.
is, you know, New Haven is more like the United States than most other communities.
Right. Right.
But I'll tell you a quick story about my daughter. So my daughter's pretty bright. You know, she's not naive. She's not sheltered. But we were driving home about 6 months ago down Whaley Avenue, and we were by the Sam's Market off of Whaley, and I think it's a little bit maybe Winthrop. And there were a lot of police cars. The road was blocked off, and I stopped. I went by, and I turned around. My daughter said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I want to see what happened." So I looked down the street. There's yellow tape up, bunch of police, one or two ambulances. And she said, "Oh, what do you think happened?" I said, "Oh, probably somebody got shot." And she turned to me and she said, "You mean they shoot people in New Haven?" And I said to myself, if she only knew what really happens here.
Right. Right.
But my point is this, is that for most people, okay, what happens here in New Haven with, 20 people being murdered a year, 80 to 100 people being shot, shot spotter going off, it's not normal, right?
No.
You live in New Haven, you've grown up here, you've grown accustomed to it. But if you're not from New Haven or an area like this, it's really something that, is different and isn't normal and isn't expected.
Right.
And so when my daughter said that to me, it brought that to light, things that we take for granted as the way of life here, for other people are, and for most people are not.
Yeah. I think we're getting to the point of being desensitized to a lot of this stuff. It just doesn't have the impact anymore that it did.
Absolutely.
It's pathetic. Isn't that heartbreaking?
And I think, and that's true, and so that's sort of a microcosm of the rest of the city, right? It's been this way for so long, and the measure of whether or not things are getting better isn't whether or not we have any shootings, but the number.
Yes.
And that's not to criticize the police or anybody else, but we'll look at stuff and say, well, yeah, murders are down. We had 20, we had 12, now we have, excuse me for 1 second.
Sure.
You look at the change in murders as opposed to the fact that there are. And the same thing with, how long it takes you to get a tree stump removed. Oh, it's down to 3 years from 5 years. Or, how long it takes to get an appointment at the Department of Public Works for bulk trash. And so that becomes sort of the baseline. And that's unfortunate, right? Because,
I remember, just to piggyback on that, I remember when I lived in the Hill, there was a portion of Sylvan Avenue that had absolutely no sidewalk. And so like handicapped people would ride their wheelchairs right down the middle of Sylvan Avenue because there was no sidewalk, no way to get to it, no way to get around it, So anyways, I remember Dolores, and I was just bitching like crazy. And I remember Dolores Cologne, remember her? Her saying to me, well, if you think the sidewalks there are bad, you should see that. I said, that isn't the point. We're not playing the game here, Dolores, of who's got the crappiest sidewalks. Because you know what? Nobody wins. And so in that respect, with that in mind and with everything that we've talked about, tell me in one sentence, more than anything in the world, and then I got another question after this, okay? But tell me, more than anything in the world, Dennis, what you want to tell me.
About, I don't know. I think, the reason why I decided to start speaking out in New Haven is because I didn't feel as though, as a homeowner and long-term resident, that anybody was listening to me or addressing any of our needs. I just didn't, I didn't feel as though we had a voice. And the reason why I say that is, if you look at most of the stories, they're all about this special interest or that special interest. And I think the people who've kept the city together for so long are the people who've lived here so long.
Right.
And I don't think the city does enough for them or recognizes them.
Thank you. Now, one conversation with one person, living or dead, who would it be with? And again, it has to be somebody of some notoriety.
Oh, it's a tough one. I've never,
I know.
it's a tough one. I'm not.
I love asking people this.
Yeah, I'm not into, I don't follow Hollywood. I'm really, I'm more into local politics than anything else. Um,
Think back on your education. Think back about things that stay in your mind. You know what I mean? That have stayed there years and years and years. Oh, Lord. Give it a break, Dennis. Jesus Christ.
yeah, I don't know, boy. This is, if I had to ask
One conversation.
one conversation,
Yeah.
someone of notoriety. Um, I'm going to go back to the Mets.
Whatever, baby. Whatever.
And the reason why is I would just love to have a conversation with Bob Murphy, who was a long time play-by-play guy for the New York Mets on radio. And I say that because when I was growing up, we'd go to sleep at night with the radio on, my brother and I, little AM, FM radio.
Yeah.
And those guys, I felt like I knew them. And you felt, and in fact, when Bob Murphy passed away, probably about 15 years ago, they had a public service at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never gone to one for any public figure. And he wasn't a public figure that most people would know, but the church was packed, and it was packed with longtime Mets and members of the public.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how well he did his job. You felt like you knew him. You got to know him.
Right.
And you were part of his family. And the current Met announcers do the same thing. Ron Darling, Keith Hernandez, Gary Cohn. You feel like you could walk up to them in a bar and have a conversation as though you've known them for years.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what
That's hard for a lot. I'm sorry, that's hard for a lot of people to relate to, because unless you're a sports fan or a Mets fan.
No, not at all. Because when you say that, it brings me back to Harry Carey, and that's somebody
Okay.
I grew up with, right? That's somebody I'll never forget. My Uncle Martin, we used to visit, I had relatives in Michigan, and I used to spend the summers with an aunt of mine that I couldn't stand up in Lake Odessa, which is on part of water. And I can never forget my Uncle Martin sitting in the back room. They had like a cottage sort of house, that had been changed to an all-weather, all year-round house. And I can never forget my Uncle Martin sitting in the back room by the washer and the dryer listening to the ball games on the radio. I'll never forget that, And Uncle Martin probably didn't say more than 10 words my entire life, but, Uncle Martin with his 5-pound potatoes, so.
Baseball is my outlet. I've got it on as background music, whether I'm out in the yard or, working. And it's, it's been, I've been with baseball, all my life. So it's my outlet.
Perfect. Dennis, this has been wonderful. I have enjoyed.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Good luck with future podcasts. You should get back on Nextdoor. I'm going to let people know about your podcast on Nextdoor.
Thanks.
Because I think this is wonderful.
You had a good time?
Oh, I had a great time.
Not painful?
Anytime I can talk about New Haven, it's a great time.
Oh my God, honest to God, I love this city. I absolutely adore this city. All right, sweetheart.
Yeah, for all its warts and imperfections.
I still love it.
Yeah, I agree.
Love it. Even the crappy parts, I love them too.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Okay, Dawn.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.